All right, so strap in, everyone, because today we're going deep on this whole Ukraine situation and their latest move in the Kursk region. Looks like you sent over a whole mountain of reports for this one. We've got The Guardian, Al Jazeera, even stuff from the South China Morning Post. Looks like the big question everyone's asking is, can this offensive actually, turn the tide of the war?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big gamble for sure. You got to remember back in August of 2024, Ukraine, they made that surprise push into Kursk. First time since World War II that we've seen enemy tanks on Russian soil.
Yeah.
They managed to grab some land, but Russia's been hitting back pretty hard, and they've got some help from some interesting allies.
Yeah, the North Korea thing is a whole other can of worms that we're going to open up a little later. But first, let's break down this new offensive. The Guardian's got this picture of a really coordinated attack. We've got Ukrainian armored columns advancing, and then they've got these special units called sappers. They're clearing out mines, got a clear path for the vehicles. And then they're even using tech to, mess with the Russian drones.
Yeah, this isn't just like a little small incursion either. Al Jazeera is reporting 2 tanks, a whole barrier vehicle, and 12 armored combat vehicles all heading towards this Russian settlement called Berdin. I mean, that's a pretty sizable force. And I think the target really suggests they're trying to get a serious foothold deeper inside Russia.
So not just a quick raid, more like digging in for the long haul. And this is where things get really, really interesting. The South China Morning Post is pointing out that this captured territory, it could be a huge bargaining chip for Ukraine if there are ever any peace talks in the future. I mean, just imagine having leverage inside Russia. That just totally flips the whole dynamic.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Zelensky's already sort of hinted that they could use Kursk as leverage if they ever do get to the negotiating table. But it's not just about the symbolism or even negotiating tactics.
Yeah.
When you control territory inside of Russia, you can disrupt supply lines, you can threaten infrastructure, and you even put psychological pressure on the Russian population.
Yeah, it's like a strategic power play with all these different layers to it. But of course, we got to remember we're getting information from both sides of a very hot war.
Exactly. I mean, Russia's saying they've repelled the attack and inflicted heavy casualties, but then Ukraine's over there claiming successful strikes, saying they're hitting both Russian and North Korean troops.
Yeah, I mean, Al Jazeera is citing these Russian sources, claiming they wiped out, most of the attacking force, even putting a number on it, 340 Ukrainian soldiers dead just in the last day. But then you've got ABC News, France 24, and Global News all talking about Ukraine's claims that they basically decimated an entire battalion of North Korean infantry and Russian paratroopers, all near this village called Makhnovka. I mean, it's like a textbook example of fog of war.
Yeah.
Who do you trust?
Yeah, this is where critical thinking really comes in. Both sides are fighting a propaganda war right alongside the actual fighting. And I mean, independent verification is basically impossible in a situation like this. So we just got to look at the claims, look at the sources, and try to read between the lines.
Yeah, because even the way they talk about the fighting tells you something. The Guardian mentioned electronic countermeasures disrupting Russian drones. Well, these countermeasures are basically high-tech jamming signals. It's like a whole other war happening in the air with radio waves just to stop those drones from spying or, launching attacks.
Right, and that detail shows you just how sophisticated this war is. This isn't just World War I with trenches and artillery. We're talking cyber warfare, electronic intelligence. It's a constant fight to control information.
Okay, so we've got Ukraine making this bold move, going for a strategic advantage, and Russia's fighting back with everything they got. But this Kursk region, it's got a deeper meaning too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Besides the military objectives, there's a symbolic victory for Ukraine just being able to get into Russian territory. It's a hit to Russian morale, and it shows the whole world that Putin's defenses are not as strong as he wants people to think.
And that symbolic victory feeds right into what Zelensky's been saying in The Guardian about using this land as leverage in future peace negotiations.
Exactly. But then we got to consider what Putin's thinking, too. The Guardian also said he hasn't backed down at all from his demands in Ukraine, including areas Russia doesn't even control. So even with Ukraine doing well in Kursk, the road to a peace deal, it's a long and winding one.
Okay, so we've got this high-stakes chess game playing out in Kursk. But then you toss in another wild card. North Korean troops fighting with the Russians.
And this is where things get really, really complicated and risky. Having a third party like North Korea involved raises the stakes so much and adds this level of unpredictability that's hard to even put into words.
And it's not just rumors either. Zelensky himself said in ABC News that there have been a lot of North Korean soldiers killed in the fighting. And Global News even put out an estimate about 11,000 North Korean troops in the region.
This just opens up so many questions. Why would North Korea risk getting involved in this war? What are they hoping to get out of this? And what does it mean for the war possibly spreading? These are all things we need to keep an eye on.
Definitely. And it's even more concerning when you look at what's happening in the rest of Ukraine. This Kursk thing isn't happening in a vacuum. The Guardian says the fighting along the eastern front lines has actually gotten worse. Russian troops are moving faster than they have since the full-scale invasion back in 2022.
And it's not random either. The Guardian and Al Jazeera both said that Russia is trying to surround this Ukrainian city called Pokrovsk in Donetsk Oblast. It's a strategically important spot. They've already taken a few villages around it, so they're really squeezing them.
And then on top of that, The Guardian and ABC News mentioned heavy fighting in other areas like Kharkov and Nikopol. It feels like the whole eastern front is ready to explode.
So this makes you wonder, is Ukraine trying to distract Russia by pushing into Kursk? Trying to make Russia spread their troops thin? Could this be a way to relieve pressure on the east by creating chaos in the north?
It's like they're trying to pull a diversion, force Russia to decide where to send their troops and their supplies. But if that's their plan, it's super risky. If they push too hard in Kursk, they could be vulnerable in other places.
Exactly. This offensive just raises more questions than answers. What's Ukraine really trying to do? Can they hang on to Kursk and defend the east? And how's Russia going to react to being attacked on multiple fronts? These are all questions we'll dig into in the next part of our deep dive. So we know that Ukraine is really going for it in Kursk, trying to turn the tables in this war. But there's this huge question mark hanging over everything, and that's the incoming Trump administration.
Yeah, it's a big unknown for sure. Trump's foreign policy, it's always been a bit of a wild card. And some of the things he said in the past about the war, Putin, even NATO have a lot of folks worried.
Right, and for those who might not know NATO, it's this military alliance that got started after World War II.
Right.
Basically, the U.S. and a bunch of European countries all agreed that if one of them got attacked, they'd all jump in to defend them. So how Trump feels about NATO, that's a big deal for this conflict.
Yeah, because right now, NATO countries, they're the ones keeping Ukraine afloat. They're sending weapons and supplies, billions in aid. But Trump's called NATO obsolete before and hinted that he might not back it up all the way. What happens to Ukraine if that aid dries up?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it gets even trickier when you remember what Trump said about Putin. He's called him strong, even kind of downplayed what Russia's been doing in Ukraine. So the worry is that with Trump as president, the U.S. might not support Ukraine as much, maybe even pressure them into a peace deal that's good for Russia, but not for them.
And it's not just talk either. ABC News said that the Biden administration is rushing to send almost $6 billion in aid to Ukraine before Trump even takes office. It's like they're trying to stock up while they still can.
Yeah, that tells you just how worried the current administration is. They're afraid Trump's going to change everything, and they're trying to lessen the damage before it's too late. But even with this extra aid, Ukraine's got a tough fight ahead. They've been at war for almost 3 years now. And it's really hurting their economy, their infrastructure, and most importantly, their people.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. Russia has way more resources, more troops, a bigger military. Even with help from the West, Ukraine is outmatched. Can they really keep this up? Can they keep fighting, especially if the U.S. backs out?
That's the big question. Can they last? And it's a question for both sides, actually. Russia's economy is hurting, too, because of this war. They're having to rely on foreign fighters like those North Korean troops. That suggests they might be running out of their own men.
So both sides are pushing themselves to the limit, trying to win. But how long can they keep it up? And at what cost? We can talk about all the tactics and maneuvers in Kursk, but we can't forget the big question. Can either side actually win this war?
That's the question that hangs over this whole thing. And to even think about what might happen, we need to think about what Trump might do once he's president. One thing he could do is try to make a peace deal happen fast.
Yeah.
He said he could end the war in a day, but he never actually said how. The worry is that he'd force Ukraine to give up a lot, maybe even give Russia some of their territory.
And that just sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. Not just for Ukraine, but for the whole region. It would set a really bad example, basically telling any country that wants to that they can just invade whoever they want, take some land, and then get a reward in the peace deal.
Right. A peace deal that just gives Russia what it wants would send a terrible message to the world. It would make Putin think he can do whatever he wants. It would make the U.S. and NATO look weak, and it could even cause more wars in the future.
So that's one scary thought. But with Trump, you never know. What if he doesn't even have a plan? What if he just keeps changing his mind? Sometimes he's for Ukraine, sometimes he's on Putin's side. What if his foreign policy is all about his ego and who he likes, instead of what's best for the world?
Yeah, that's another possibility, and it might be the scariest one. If he keeps flip-flopping like that, Ukraine won't know what to do, and the U.S.'s allies won't know if they can trust them anymore.
It would be like watching a game of roulette, except the lives of millions of people are at stake. And it all depends on what one very unpredictable guy decides to do.
And that's what's so dangerous about making foreign policy all about one person. When it's all about egos and short-term wins instead of thinking about the big picture and what's best for the long haul, it can be a disaster.
Okay, so we've got this war going on, Ukraine making a risky play in Kursk, and this huge question mark hanging over it all. What's Trump going to do once he's in charge? It's enough to make your head spin.
It's definitely a complicated and a scary situation. But that's exactly why we need to be smart and think critically.
Right, we can't just sit here and watch. We need to stay informed and keep asking the tough questions and make sure our leaders are doing the right thing.
Because in the end, what happens in this war and the choices that world leaders make are going to affect all of us. It'll change the world we live in, the values we stand for, and the future we leave behind.
So as we go into the last part of this deep dive, let's circle back to something we've only touched on so far. North Korea and what they're doing in all of this.
Yeah, they're a total wild card in an already crazy situation. We need to figure out what they're up to and what they might do next if we want to really understand this whole mess.
Okay, so North Korea, it's like they're that weird cousin that shows up at a family reunion and you're just like, what are you doing here? We know they're in Kursk with the Russians, but it's hard to figure out what they're after.
Yeah, it's all very hush-hush. But we can try to piece things together. One idea is that Kim Jong-un's thinking this is his chance to get buddy-buddy with Putin, maybe get some of that sweet, sweet economic aid or some cool military tech from Russia.
Yeah, because let's be real, North Korea is kind of like the kid in the corner at a party. Nobody really wants to talk to them, and their economy's a mess, so maybe they think if they help Russia out, they'll get some goodies in return.
Could be. Another theory is that North Korea is using this war as like a training program for their army. It's kind of scary to think about, but they might be sending soldiers to Ukraine to get some real combat experience, see how their tactics and weapons work in a real fight.
Dude, that's terrifying when you really think about it. Thousands of North Korean soldiers going to Ukraine, getting all battle-hardened, and going back home with all that experience. What does that even mean for South Korea and Japan? What does it mean for that whole part of the world?
And then there's the moral side of things, too. Are these soldiers even trained properly? Do they have decent equipment? Are they really going because they want to, or is the government making them go? Are they just pawns in this big power struggle?
Yeah, we don't know the answers to those questions, but it makes you wonder about the human cost of all this. It's easy to get caught up in the strategy and the politics, but we can't forget about the people on the ground putting their lives on the line, stuck in the middle of this whole mess.
That's what makes the North Korea thing so unsettling. They're so unpredictable, and they could make things so much worse. I mean, what happens if they do something that makes South Korea or Japan get involved? Could this turn into a much bigger war?
It's a scary thought. And it shows that this war in Ukraine, it's not just a problem for them, it's a problem for the whole world. The choices that leaders make in Moscow, Kiev, Washington, even Pyongyang, they all have consequences that ripple out everywhere. It's like one of those chain reactions. One thing happens and then another, and it's hard to know where it'll all end.
And that's exactly why it's so important to stay informed. We need to understand the different sides, what they want, the possible outcomes of all the moves they make in this big global game of chess. We got to be critical thinkers, question what we're told, dig deeper, connect the dots, and come to our own conclusions.
Because this war, with all its ups and downs, with all the military stuff and the politics and the human stories that's shaping the world as we know it, it's a reminder that even things that seem far away can have a huge impact on our lives, our beliefs, and what the future is going to look like.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Ukraine Kursk offensive with all the complications and uncertainty, we hope you've got a better grasp of the situation, who the players are, and what's at stake.
And more than anything, we hope this has made you curious, made you want to learn more, and given you the tools to talk about this war and what it means for all of us. Because at the end of the day, building a more peaceful and just world, that's on all of us.